Okay, so tonight we are going to talk about exponents. And there's two specific kind of exponents we're going to look at today. An exponent of 0 and an exponent that is a negative number. So there are two rules, so you're going to want to write these down. Any number raised to a power or to a 0 power is defined to be equal to 1. So 17 to the 0 power is 1, or a to the 0 power is 1. So anything to the 0 power is just equal to 1. The other one is any number raised to a negative exponent is expressed as a fraction. That means if I have, like this right here, 17 to the negative 2, I end up with 1 over 17 squared. So it kind of moves it to the basement or to the bottom. This is what the rule looks like. A to the negative n is equal to 1 over a to the n. So let's look at a couple of these. So 13 to the 0 power would just equal 1. Because again, it doesn't really matter what the base is. If it's raised to the 0 power, it's 1. Now, this one, 3 to the negative 3. Well, if I just had 3 to the third power, that would be 3 times 3 times 3, right? But I have this negative sign here, and that means something different. So since the exponent here means that I have it 3 times, I can't have it negative 3 times. It doesn't mean I make the base negative, because the base doesn't change. So I mean, you could think about it being like if you were in debt, that would be a negative. So up here are our numbers on top. So if I have a negative, it actually means that those numbers are going to go down here to the bottom. So if I have 3 to the third, it would be 3 times 3 times 3. If I have 3 to the negative third, we can think about that negative, meaning it's going to go down to the bottom. I have 1 over 3 times 3 times 3. And 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. So 3 to the negative 3 is 1 over 27. Now, sometimes we have our negative already in the bottom. So if I have 3 over 9 to the negative 1, so it's already in the bottom. I can't push it any farther to the bottom. So what it actually does is it kind of does the reverse. So if it's on the bottom and it's negative, we're actually going to move it to the top. So it ends up on the top. Whoops. Not a negative though. Once you move it, it's not negative anymore. Now the 3 here, it's got nothing up there with the negative, nothing's fancy going on, so it just stays right where it is, 3. 9 to the first power is just 9, so 9 times 3 is 27. So this one is equal to 27. So one of the most important things when you're looking at exponents is that each exponent does something different, and it only acts on the base that it goes with. So this negative 1 goes with this 9, and so it affects it, but it does not affect the 3 on the top. The 3 just stays there. Okay, so in this case, I have a negative 4, and I have with a base of 3 and then a negative 9. So the negative 9 has no exponent, so it just stays the same. Nothing changes with it. But this negative here means that I'm going to move my base to the bottom, to the basement. 3, and I keep the exponent of 4, but I don't have a negative anymore because I got rid of it. Once I moved the base, then the exponent or the negative exponent goes away. And this ends up being 9, or negative 9 to 3 to the 4th is 81. And of course I can simplify this because 9 over 81 is just 9, so it's negative 1/9. Okay, now this one, since the negative 8 is in parentheses, our base is negative 8. Since I have a negative exponent, that means my whole base is going to move to the bottom, and it's squared. Since I got nothing left on top, remember we can't just leave it as nothing and it's not 0. It's kind of like a whole number. Every whole number can be written as a fraction with a base of 1. So if I move everything to the base, then I have a 1 on top. So we can put a 1 there. And then negative 8 squared is 64. And of course it's 64, not negative 64, because since we have these parentheses, this negative 8 squared means negative 8 times negative 8. And two negatives, when you multiply them together, make a positive. if I would have negative 8 squared that look like this, well now that means negative 8, or I'm sorry, a negative 8 times 8. And I only have one negative sign. That would be just, or that would be a negative 64 because only one negative means my answer is still going to be negative. So be careful about that. Those parentheses matter. Okay, evaluate each expression. If A is negative 5 and B is 4. So I'm going to put parentheses where my variable is because all these little negatives floating around is really important that we have parentheses. So please do not just write down the number. You need to put parentheses because A here is negative 5. So negative 5 goes in the parentheses. So just like we said on the page before, if I didn't have those parentheses there, that negative 2 would only apply to the 5. But because it's in parentheses, the whole thing is my base. So the negative sign here means that it's going to go to the bottom, and all of it's going to go to the bottom because it was all in the parentheses. And then I'm going to square negative 5, which is 25. 1 over 25. Okay, the next one, 3 to the negative 3, and that one's just fine. We don't need to put anything in. Put some parentheses here for the A, and then I'm going to put some parentheses here for the B. A is negative 5, and B is 4. Now, I'm going to go ahead and write a line, because I know I got negatives. I know stuff's going to be moving around. So I'm going to look at first this right here. That negative 3 means that that exponent's going to go down here to the bottom, so I have 3 to the third. Once I move it, I get rid of the negative. The next one is the negative 5 to the negative 2. Again, it's negative, so I'm going to move it to the bottom. So negative 5 squared, and we get rid of the negative since I moved it. And then the last one is 4 to the negative 1. It is also a negative exponent, so I'm going to move it to the bottom to the first power. And that takes care of everything. I got nothing left on top, but again, we can't just leave it, so we're going to put a 1 to kind of hold its place. 3 cubed is 27. Negative 5 squared is 25. And then 4 to the first power is just 4. And then if I multiply all of those numbers together, I get 2,700. And that's my answer. All right, now this one, this is already in parentheses, and then I'm going to have to put parentheses for my A. And my A was, let me go back, A is negative 5. So I'm going to put negative 5 in here. Now, I can do this one of two ways. I think I'll start in the middle, because when we do order of operations, it says you start in the middle. And I can certainly multiply 4 times negative 20, right? I mean, negative 5. It's negative 20. Negative 20. And then that is to the second power. Now I can deal with that negative there. So 1 over negative 20, and I do want to make sure I keep that in my parentheses, squared. Now, we want that in the parentheses, remember, because if I have the negative in the parentheses, then I'm going to have 2 negatives. So negative 20 squared is 400. Okay. Sometimes we have variables and we don't have anything to plug in. So back on the last few examples, it said A is equal to this and B is equal to this. But sometimes in algebra, we just get these variables and we don't know what they represent. But what we want to do is to simplify. Remember, simplify is different than evaluate. If you evaluate something, you're going to actually get a numeric answer. But if we simplify, then we're just going to try and make it look a little neater or a little nicer or easier. but we're not actually going to get a value. So if I look at this first one, x to the negative 6, the only thing I can do anything with is that negative. And I can say that I'm going to move that 6 to the bottom um, because it's negative. And of course, since I don't know what x is, there's nothing else I can do. So that's it. That's the simplified as it can be. When you're simplifying exponents, it's not considered simplified if you have any negatives. So the first thing I'm going to look for are negatives. So in this one, I got a negative here and I got a negative there, right? So I'm going to draw my line and I'm going to decide top and bottom. Okay, so my first number is 6. Nothing fancy there. It's just a 6, so it stays right where it is on top. The next one is m to the negative 8. Since it has a negative exponent, that means it's going to move to the bottom. So the m to the 8 is going to go to the bottom. The next one is n, and no negative exponent there, so n just stays right there on top. And then on the bottom, I have a p to the first power, or to the negative first power, which means it's got to move. And since it's already on the bottom, I'm going to move it to the top. So I move it up to the top and put a 1 by it, and we are done. And that's it. That's the only thing you can do. So why don't you pause the video and see if you can do this one right here. And then when you get it an answer, you can unpause it and I will do it for you. Okay, so 15 is going to stay on the top. S to the negative 9 moves to the bottom, keeping the 9. And then t to the negative 1 goes to the bottom, and I keep the 1. And that's it. Okay, so got some more to evaluate here. Now this one has some m and p's, got some variables for the exponents. So basically I have this right here is going to represent my m, and this is going to represent my p. M is 4 and P is negative 2. So since 4 is raised to a negative power, that means it's going to have to get moved to the bottom. So 4 squared, and 4 squared is 16. Then I have P to the negative n, and this you got to be really careful about when they start putting a negative variable, as P is negative 2 and n is 5. So even though n is positive, because there's this negative on here, that makes my exponent negative. So that means my negative 2 has to go to the bottom, and it is in parentheses, so to the 5th. But since 5 is odd, that means I've got 5 negative signs. It's going to stay negative. So I get negative 32. Now this one, 1 over n to the negative 4. N is 5. Got my negative, but it's already on the bottom, so that means I'm going to move it to the top. So 1 over, oops, I didn't move it to the top. 5 to the 4th power, and since I moved it, I get rid of the negative. 5 to the 4th power is 625. And that's it.